Okay, so we're going to be recording this, and for everybody who's joining us right now, the recording will be made available tomorrow in about 24 hours or so. So if you miss anything, or if you want to rewatch anything, take more notes, you will have the opportunity to do that. And we're also going to provide you an MP3 of this class as well, so you definitely won't miss anything, and you can listen to it in any format you like, driving, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, welcome everybody. You can leave your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box. In the Q&A box and the chat box, you should see underneath my video, there's a little button that says chat, and there's another button that says Q&A. Q&A is good for longer questions that you don't want to get lost in the stream of the chat box, so I definitely recommend that. And also, if you're gonna be asking a question, this is a good opportunity to hop on microphone and video cam. So if you'd like to, definitely let me know in the chat if you would like to directly connect and ask your question live, because that's always the benefit of being on one of these live interactive sessions. So if you have any technical issues, if there's any kind of connectivity issues that arise, just let me know as well in the chat. They usually clear up on their own, but if it's consistent or if you suddenly lose audio, just let me know, and I'll definitely help you out. And now a word about Neura. I see we have a lot of Neura students who are here, so you already know about this, but for those of you who are new to Neura Learning, it's an online community for transformational learning, interesting courses for interesting people. We explore topics such as human potential, transpersonal psychology, astrology, philosophy, and the mystery and nature of human consciousness and consciousness as a whole. Tonight we are joined by Mitch Horowitz for the Miracle Club. Mitch is a PEN Award-winning author of books including Occult America, One Simple Idea, Mind as Builder, and most recently, The Miracle Club. Mitch has discussed alternative spirituality on Dateline and NBC, CBS Sunday Morning. And Mitch, I love how you really are able to inject yourself directly into the sort of mainstream conversations. It's wonderful. He's written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Time, and many other publications. The Washington Post says Mitch treats esoteric ideas and movements with an even-handed intellectual studiousness that is too often lost in today's raised voice discussions. And David Lynch says Mitch is solid gold, which, coming from David Lynch, I mean, that's amazing. So also the Chinese government has censored his work, and I'm kind of curious to ask you about that. Maybe we can save that for the Q&A. Welcome, Mitch. Thanks for joining us tonight. It's great to have you.
Thank you. This is the first webinar that I've done with Neura Learning, and I'm delighted to be here with all of you. There are some familiar names, there are some new names, and I'm just really thrilled to have the opportunity to speak with you over this forum. And welcome to the Miracle Club. You're all going to become charter members of something called the Miracle Club. And I take that very seriously, and my wish is that although tonight is a freewheeling, informal session, my real wish for everyone this evening and for everyone who watches the recording of this webinar is that you do not come away from it unchanged. I take very seriously that philosophical and mystical ideas should work change in the life of the individual. Measurable, concrete change. I'm not interested so much in handing out consolation prizes as if to say, well, you didn't get your heart's desire, but you got understanding. I think that in this life, individual aspiration is sacred. And I think that to feel satisfied and to feel happy in life, and I believe that we mustn't shy away from terms like happiness. We mustn't shy away from colloquial, everyday, concrete terms like satisfaction, happiness, fulfillment. Attaining some of what you classify as your deepest aspiration in life is fundamental to feeling that life has been worth the journey, that life has been more than just a process of learning, but has been a process of achieving, aspiring, attaining, and doing. Now I see, do we have a little technical glitch with the camera? I'm getting.
Oh no, sorry, Mitch. That's just me. I'm turning off my camera to kind of give you the stage.
Oh, okay, very good.
So folks aren't just seeing me too, sitting there and nodding my head.
Mercury retrograde just ended on the 15th, but there may be some lingering effects, so I wasn't sure. I was just checking in. So as I was saying, I do feel that aspiration is sacred, and I do feel that the individual is entitled to reflect back on his or her life and feel that it was punctuated by episodes of attainment, that there was something you wanted to achieve. You wanted the road to lead to Rome, and in certain instances, you got to Rome. And I believe that ethical and spiritual and mystical philosophy should facilitate that. It should be practical, it should be applicable, it should be measurable. And I've really come to embrace that point of view at this point in my life. Let me say a quick word about the term the Miracle Club, because I don't, and I never would, throw around the term miracle in some sort of a glib or facile way. It's a sacred term. It's a meaningful term. And yet, I do not feel that the concept of a miracle is so far away from us that we shouldn't be able to converse about it, that we shouldn't be able to exchange about it. Very simply put, this is how I define a miracle. It is a fortuitous departure from all expected circumstance. A fortuitous departure from all expected circumstance. It is a happening in your life that is welcome and that goes beyond anything that could have been reasonably expected. And these things do occur. And I'm going to talk about some examples, large and small, in my own life and the lives of others. We experience friction in life. We experience tremendous difficulties in life, in as much as we are sometimes visited by friction, by catastrophe. We are also visited by the extraordinary. And my contention is that there is some relationship between the medium of our thoughts and things that play out in our lives. I do not believe that we live under any solitary mental super law. We live under many laws and forces. There are accidents in life. I've never liked the expression, there are no accidents, as if everything is meaningful and advancing. There are accidents in life. There are tragedies in life. There are physical limitations. Mortality alone tells us that much. But there are also miracles. There are also extraordinary events. And the mind is one of the laws and forces under which we live. And that's extraordinary enough. That's extraordinary enough. That means you're never entirely without resources, even when you're in a situation where you feel like everything is being pushed and pulled. And I'll say a word about how I came to that point of view. But one further note on the Miracle Club. I've just defined miracles for you, at least as how I'm using the term, as a fortuitous departure from all expected circumstance. The Miracle Club is a name that's grounded in occult history. In the 1870s, a group of mystical, metaphysical experimenters here in New York, where I am speaking from, formed a little occult salon, which they called the Miracle Club. They were hanging around over in what we call the Theater District, or what is sometimes called Hell's Kitchen, on the west side of Manhattan, in Midtown Manhattan. And they gathered together with a passionate interest in experimenting with seances, mediumship, ESP, life after death, spirit communication, the uses and powers of the mind. They were interested in rediscovering ancient and occult religious philosophies, including Kabbalah, including the mystery religions, so much as we can understand them, of Egypt, Greece, Rome. And they wanted to form this circle of radical occult experimentation within this little salon. The Miracle Club was a short-lived group. It was very informal and it didn't really hang together, but it did form the basis for the founding of the Theosophical Society, which was founded by Madam H.P. Blavatsky, who was a New Yorker at the time, and her colleague Henry Steele Olcott. And the Theosophical Society became an enormously influential part of modern life. They launched the revolution in occult spirituality and alternative spirituality that was felt around the world and is still being felt today. The Miracle Club was the seed of that. And my wish in using that term is to reignite the spirit of those early experimenters. Informal, didn't wear any labels, didn't have any loyalty oaths, nothing to join, no one to pay. They just wanted to ask that wonderful question, what is out there? What is out there? So congratulations, you're now members of the Miracle Club. You don't have to carry around a membership card. There's no decoder ring or secret handshake. You just have to harbor a passion to experiment, a passion to search. I've searched through many different forms of spiritual and ethical philosophy, mainstream and occult. Jeremy mentioned that I've talked about these topics in the mainstream, and I can promise you I don't talk about these subjects in the mainstream in a different way or in a different tone than that which I'm using right now. It's not as if I show up on CNN and suddenly I'm speaking in this manner that's unrecognizable to how I'm talking to you right now. I believe very importantly in consistency of message. And I've always called myself a believing historian. I'm a chronicler of spiritual and occult ideas, and I'm a participant in those ideas. And at this point in my life, after about 20 years of doing this, I've really come to the principle that thoughts are causative. I believe very, very deeply that our minds are not just some kind of localized phenomena like bubbles in a glass of carbonated liquid that represents our body. Our minds have extra physical qualities. Our minds interplay with our surrounding environment in a causative, creative manner. It is not always possible to track that. It is not always visible or understandable what the mental antecedent is of an event. And as I alluded earlier, there are lots of intervening forces. If I was to say that the law of mind causation, in order to be a law, must be consistent, must be ever operative, must be always happening, it doesn't mean we're always experiencing it in the same way. Gravity is a law. Gravity is always happening. Gravity is ever operative. Gravity is, in a certain sense, really mass being attracted to itself. But you're going to experience gravity much differently here on Earth than you would on the planet Jupiter, where its force would crush you, or on the moon, where you could jump 10 feet into the air. So gravity is always going on, always operating according to the same principles, but the way it's experienced is going to be radically different based on the law of mass, based on what celestial body you find yourself on. So something similar, I think, is probably going on with our minds. There are so many intervening agencies and forces and laws. I don't believe it's possible to say, and I think it really paints one into a real ethical corner to say that your mind is the solitary cause or the ultimate cause behind everything. The mind or awareness may be the ultimate underlying factor and arbiter of reality, but there's so much else going on that I don't think we occupy a perch or a perspective to always be able to sort of trace out the antecedent and treat mind as this simple matter of cause and effect. It's anything but simple. And yet, in as much as I think we can define miracles in a practical way, in as much as we can venerate the concept of miracles, never use that term glibly, we also can find certain circumstances, and probably all of you listening have your own examples, in which there has been just an extraordinary, uncanny, compelling, and unmistakable confluence between thought and circumstance. I want to give you 3 quick examples in which this has played out recently in my own life. There are other times and other forums and other places where I speak about quantum theory and particle mechanics and ESP research and placebo studies and neuroplasticity, because there's a lot going on in the hard sciences that speaks to this theme. And I write about a lot of that in my book, The Miracle Club, which is actually coming out in the month of October, so it's still a bit of a ways off. I write about that, some of that, in my book, One Simple Idea, which is a history of the positive mind movement. But our aim tonight is really to be practical. You're being inducted into the Miracle Club, and I think you're entitled to hear some very practical ideas about how to begin to experiment, use, and testify yourself to the influences of the mind. There's a time and there's a place for talking about theoretical material, and you all and I may have another seminar where I dedicate myself to that, but I'm going to be more practical, hands-on, and anecdotal tonight because we only have 90 minutes together, some of which is going to be dedicated to a question and answer and an exchange. And I really want you to come away from this feeling that you have concrete, actionable things that you can use tonight. And I am not kidding. I mean, I really want us to end this webcast at 9:30 and feel that there's stuff to start putting into action right away. But before I do that, and I'm going to get some very practical material, I want to just quickly offer up 3 ideas, 3 stories that were influential in my coming to the perspective that there is a real concrete relationship between what we think, what ideals and mental pictures we hold, and what happens to us. Here's one story that happened to me several years ago that was very striking to me, a very intimate story. I haven't thought about it recently, but it occurred to me shortly before tonight's webcast that I wanted to share this with you. I have written about it, but I've spoken about it infrequently and not recently. Several years ago, I was part of an esoteric group of experimenters, not unlike the Miracle Club. I don't want to get into the name because for some people it was a private association, and I just want to honor my friends and colleagues' privacy. But it was a very, very rigorous group where we were inquiring very, very deeply into esoteric matters. There's my son, Caleb. That's not a ghost, in case you're wondering. Caleb, if you need to leave the room, feel free. So it is a ghost. There's no one there. This was a very rigorous group where we would explore esoteric questions. It was very intellectually driven and it was very physically demanding. Among the things we would do is we would sometimes go on these, what you might consider these very grueling, tough winter camping trips. And part of the idea of this, I think, was that it would shake people out of their comfort zone, because so often people talk about what they would do in different situations, or people have attitudes about themselves, thinking that they are a generous people. That's my younger son, Toby. And yet our lives are so often lived by habit that we don't get to test ourselves very much. But when you put yourself into a situation where you don't have electricity, you don't have running water, you don't have various physical comforts, you get placed in front of yourself in ways that you really can't inquire about when you're just going through the motions of everyday life, where warmth, food, electricity, and so on are just taken for granted and are just a flick of a switch away. So one of the activities that we would do in this group is we would go into the woods and go through some very, very grueling overnight or weekend or sometimes week-long trips in very tough conditions. You get put in front of a different perspective of yourself. And the person who was the leader of this particular group, who was a beautiful and deeply intellectual and very powerful man, gave me an unusual job to do shortly before one of our sojourns into the woods. We were all staying in tents, and he wanted me to go out and purchase, as he put it, these heart-shaped pink buckets. He gave me the job of finding heart-shaped pink buckets, which would serve as chamber pots, basically, for the women in their tents. There may have been some insider joke about all this, but I wasn't privy to it. And he just said to me, your job is to go out and to purchase a certain number, 10 or so, of these heart-shaped pink buckets. And if you can't find them, we'll settle for red buckets. And if you can't find red heart-shaped buckets, you can just get standard red buckets as an absolute last recourse. Now, I live in New York City. I'm surrounded by stores, hardware stores, home goods stores, stores that sell industrial cleaning supplies, office cleaning supplies. It was an unusual demand, but I thought I would be able to do it. And I can tell you for a fact, I looked and I looked and I looked. I called store after store after store. I could find nothing like what was being asked of me. I first looked for pink heart-shaped buckets, then I just looked for standard pink buckets, then I looked for standard red buckets, which I thought would be a cinch to find. And I could not find them anywhere. And again, I'm living in New York City. There's stores all over the place. I'm making phone calls. I'm looking online. I'm popping my head at different places, hardware stores, grocery stores, places that sell various cleaning supplies, industrial and otherwise. Nothing, nothing, nothing. I couldn't find the pink heart-shaped buckets. I may as well have been looking for pink elephants. I couldn't find standard pink buckets. I couldn't even find standard red buckets. I tried for a long time and I got absolutely nowhere. So finally, one day, I was about to run a household errand, and I was standing outside this grocery store in my neighborhood, and I was going to call on my cell phone the leader of this group and fess up and say, look, I've tried and I've tried and I've tried, but I failed. And something told me, don't do that just yet. Don't do that just yet. Don't make that call. And I went inside this nothing little neighborhood grocery store. It was a D'Agostino's grocery store at the corner of 3rd Avenue and 38th Street. It's still there if anybody would like to visit. It's just one of these nothing kind of neighborhood grocery stores. It's not particularly well kept. It's not particularly clean. The prices are high, but it's places that Manhattan folk go because we don't have too many grocery stores. And when you need eggs, you need eggs. So I stepped into this grocery store just to run a quick errand. I go to the back of the grocery store where the dairy section is. I was probably buying eggs. And after well more than a week of fruitless search, getting nowhere near my goal, sitting there in the back of the grocery store was a gleaming, brand new pile of neatly stacked pink heart-shaped buckets. I was absolutely shocked. I was absolutely shocked. And I grab a stock boy and I say, can you tell me, what I'm looking at there? And he looks at me like, here's today's lunatic. And he says, those are pink buckets. A gleaming pile of more than 10 pink heart-shaped buckets. And I had been unable to find anything even remotely close to so unusual an item everywhere I looked in Manhattan, and a whisker before I was about to make that phone call. The very thing I'm looking for shows right up in front of my eyes in the unlikeliest of places, a nothing little neighborhood grocery store that you don't go into unless you have no choice because you have to run a quick errand. And right there, and I said, when did those come into stock? And the stock guy said, today. They had just unpacked them. They were mint, they were gleaming, they didn't have a fleck of dust on them. And I was quite surprised. I was more than surprised. I was astonished that something I had labored and labored and labored to find and had held in mind as an ideal proved elusive And I found it precisely the last place I would have imagined moments before I, honest to God, was ready to call my teacher and say, I failed. I can't do this. It did not feel ordinary. You can crunch the numbers on an actuarial table, and somebody might say, well, you know, there's this likelihood, there's that likelihood, maybe it's not that unusual. Actuarial tables are very good at measuring odds and statistics and dealing in generalities, but they're not very good at dealing with the emotional gravity and the emotional impact that events like this occur, that events like this possess. It's funny, as I'm telling this story, my wife recently broke her wrist. She's doing much better in a snowboarding accident. This is a brace that she was given, a pink brace. It's funny. I never noticed the color was pink before. But that pink buckets story always stayed with me because it was very intimate. It was very focused. There weren't that many outside variables involved. And the depth of emotion that I felt in discovering these buckets was almost like discovering an oasis in the middle of the desert when you just feel like you're given up for lost. It was the most unlikely of circumstances that seemed to be responding to an ideal that I held in mind. Here's another circumstance that I wanted to mention. A friend of mine recently has been recovering from a very serious illness. He lives in New England, and he found himself in dire straits financially. His finances were absolutely at an end. And he was in a situation where he had about $100 remaining in his checking account. And he really was absolutely without resources, circumstances, means, or a conception of where to go next. It was a desperate situation. It was a desperate situation. And there was one night, this unfolded maybe about 2 months ago. There was one night where I was possessed, I don't know why, to go online on Facebook. You can probably go on Facebook and you can find the post. I want you to try to verify these things because everything I say to you, I think, should be verifiable. I don't ever want to exaggerate. I don't ever want to cut corners, and I don't ever want to dramatize. I'm talking to you about remarkable instances in life, and I feel very strongly that I should be bringing transparency to the table. So you can probably find this on Facebook. I went on Facebook about 2 months ago, and I announced to everybody, let's try a little experiment together. Let's try a little experiment together. There's an old self-help book from 1948, which I just found a copy of on my shelf, called The Magic of Believing. The Magic of Believing, by a journalist named Claude Bristol. This particular edition I have was signed by Claude Bristol. I don't know if you can see his signature. It says, very truly yours, Claude M. Bristol. He wrote this book in 1948, and he lived for only a few more years, but this became a favorite book of some celebrities, including Liberace and Phyllis Diller. And it's really your basic kind of mind power book. Bristol maintained in this book, a lot like what I'm maintaining now, that if you hold some passionate thought intensively in mind, and if you use certain means and elements to heighten your attention on that thought, affirmations, meditations, visualizations, maybe prayer, holding it with you intensely and all the time, it will affect things. So I issued this challenge and this invitation to all my friends on Facebook. I took a picture of a 1950s style chair that we have here in our apartment. I took a picture of this book and I said, hey gang, let's pretend that we're all just discovering this book for the first time, as if it's 1948. Let's stay up all night and read this book together. Hi, Caleb. And see what transpires, see what follows from it. I like to invite people into these little experiments sometimes, taking maybe a book that you've read before and just kind of imagining that you're encountering it for the very first time. There's something about the beginner's mind that's very arousing and very powerful. And so my friend, who was recovering in New England from his illness, who was financially in a truly, truly dire, even disastrous situation. He took me up on this challenge. Instead of reading the book, he listened to an audio recording of the book, which I did. I do some narration, and I've narrated an edition of this book. He listened to an audio recording over and over and over. Now, I'm not suggesting to you that you have to do something like that, but he felt like doing it. And I think getting your emotions involved in bringing your mental images, bringing your mental ideals to a kind of pitch, and maybe trying to sustain that pitch is very important. So for me, maybe it came in the form of staying up half the night, reading this book. For my friend, it came in the form of listening to my audio recording of it over and over. And he said, he put it on headphones and he just kept listening to it, trying to really let it permeate his psyche, seep into his bones, so to speak. He calls me several days later and he said, there's something just incredible that I have to tell you. And I was wrapped up in a couple of deadlines, so it took me a little while to get back to him. But I did get back to him. And he said he had been talking to a former boss of his at a job that he left, good couple of years ago. And his boss said to him, "Did you know that you left money behind here in a 401k account?" And my friend was aware of that, but he thought it was nothing. He thought it was maybe just a few $100s, just some kind of chump change. And he said, "Yeah, I was aware of it. I didn't think it was, anything much." And his former boss said to him, "Have you checked it?" He said, "No." And he told my friend, "There's $50,000 sitting in that account." And it was the equivalent of manna from heaven. It was the equivalent of manna from heaven. Now, I can't tell you that there was some direct line of causation from my friend's thoughts to this incredible piece of absurd good news, miraculous good news. It may have been coincidence, but to my friend, it didn't feel like coincidence. He was in a situation where he had no means, no resources, no sense of where to turn next, and really limited capacity to solve his problem. So he used the one tool that was indelibly available to him, that's available to you, that's available to me, and he chose, as a matter of his own personal comfort, selection, excitement, to listen over and over to a recording of this classic book written more than a lifetime ago. And something happened. Something happened. Was it purposeful? Was it meaningful? To my friend, it was. To my friend, it was. Again, you could crunch the numbers and say, well, maybe it wasn't all that remarkable. The numbers don't reflect the desperation, the fortuitousness, the extraordinary turn of events, and the deeply felt, the almost revelatory quality of before and after that was linked to the event in his mind. I want to share one more quick story, and then I'm going to get into some methods that you can experiment with, because we are here to experiment. The original Miracle Club was a group of radical experimenters. I'm not trying to push dogma, doctrine, certainty. I'm only endorsing experimentation. Because in a sense, every time one of these events occurs, I don't see it as confirming my instincts. I see it as deepening our questions and deepening them together, but sometimes bringing us to something that's very deeply needed as well. I want to give you one last story. This is from my life, and this occurred this past summer. I hope you'll enjoy this. And it's funny. It didn't occur to me to tell this story until quite recently, but this story has a coda to it. And again, you can go on Facebook and look it up. The circumstances will be all there, laid out for you to see, so that you'll know I'm not fudging any of the forensic details, because I think it's very important, again, to be transparent about this stuff. I don't like people who juice up or make up stories. In everything that I'm telling you to the best of my ability as it occurred, at least as I observed it. Last summer, the summer of 2017, For some odd reason that I cannot tell you, almost as if like some associative switch flicked in my head, I started getting very interested in the pop group the Monkees. You all remember the Monkees, I'm sure. Some of you are, of course, too young to remember the Monkees, but hopefully you saw reruns of some of their shows when you were a kid, maybe on MTV. The Monkees were sort of a made-for-TV pop band in the late 60s. It was the television world's response to the popularity of the Beatles. And the Monkees were, of course, a manufactured, made for a TV group. But the remarkable thing was the various members of the Monkees, Mickey Dolenz, Mike Nesmith, Davy Jones, Peter York, all actually proved to be pretty formidable artists in their own right. They eventually pressured their record label, and they had enough commercial clout to actually apply pressure to their record label to start to write and produce and perform their own music. They did do live tours. In fact, when they toured America in 1967, they brought along Jimi Hendrix as their opening act. It was one of the big moments where Jimi Hendrix got exposed to American audiences. And on some of the Monkees albums, they did in fact write, produce, and perform a majority of their own songs. So they were meant to be this kind of commodified little band that was just made and packaged for TV, but they overran the box that they were intended to be put in. They were like a channel that overran their banks. And so last summer, for some reason that I can't even tell you, I don't know what the antecedent was, I began listening to the Monkees all the time and thinking about them. And my two kids, who some of you have seen wander by our line of vision here, they began to get to know some of the Monkees songs and some of the Monkees lyrics. And my wife, Allison, could only shake her head as if, what in God's name got you suddenly interested in listening to the Monkees? And so this kind of went on and on. And I never knew kind of what stirred the pot, what got me thinking of it. My kids got to know the lyrics to I'm Not Your Stepping Stone. I was reading books about the Monkees. I was listening to their music, so on and so forth. In October of 2017, I took a sabbatical from my job in publishing. Our company had been purchased by Random House. Random House wanted everybody to take these self-development sabbaticals. And at first I was hesitant to take one because I was perfectly comfortable just carrying on my work in my office. But it was clear that to be a team player, you were expected to take a 30-day sabbatical. So I took a 30-day sabbatical and thought, well, I'll use it. It'll be a period of time to work on some new projects, work on some new articles, maybe work on a new book. During that period of time, I wrote most of my book, Mind as Builder, which is about the positive mind metaphysics of Edgar Cayce. And it's funny, though, the first week of my sabbatical, there was a period of time where I found myself at an impasse. I just found myself at an impasse. I was in between projects, and I didn't know what to start next. And I was sitting there in my living room, maybe about 25 feet from where I'm sitting right now. And I began to think to myself, I wanted to be given a big journalistic assignment by a big visible newspaper or magazine, something that I could really throw myself into that would reach the public in a dramatic and considerable way. And I was thinking about this, and within a very, very short time of my thinking about this, I got a direct message over Twitter from the book review editor at the Washington Post. And he said to me that there was another editor there who had been trying to reach me, but there was some sort of an email snafu, and he couldn't reach me. And I said, okay, well, here's my email. It seems to be working. And we ironed out whatever the communication snafu was. And this editor called me up, and he said to me, do you know who Mike Nesmith is from the Monkees? And I said, yes, I knew who Mike Nesmith was. And he said to me, do you have any kind of friendship or relationship with Mike Nesmith? And I said, no, I don't. And he said, well, Mike Nesmith is a Christian scientist. And he is very deeply involved in some of the mind metaphysics things that you are interested in. And he just wrote a new memoir called Infinite Tuesday. And we'd like you to review it for us. And I was completely blown away because this was almost an experience of time bending in on itself. I had been thinking about, in almost some sort of oddly precognitive way, listening to and immersing myself in the music and the background and the biographies of the different members of the Monkees. And out of the clear blue, as I was sitting there in this space of mental impasse during the first week of a sabbatical that I didn't even really want to go on, and thinking I'd like a journalistic assignment to really kind of ramp up my sense of morale and artistic drive, I hear from an editor asking me to write this review in the Washington Post of Mike Nesmith's memoir, learning for the first time that Nesmith was a Christian Scientist. Now, here's a weird coda to all this. And again, you verify it yourself. You can do it right now as you're listening. Go onto my Facebook page. Nesmith, who I don't know, just reposted my review the other day and said he was very touched by it because he felt that I got what he was trying to swing at in his memoir. And I had no other contact with the Monkees or Mike Nesmith or anything related to this other than just coming into this weird, wild, unexpected, and unexplainable fascination with them. It was almost as if I was experiencing a sense of disruption in time being this linear, orderly cause and effect thing, which may have something to do with the manner in which our thoughts interplay with reality. Maybe there's some element of precognition that goes on. Maybe time is not the orderly, linear, straight line point between A and B that we think it is, that we've been raised to think it is. Maybe we're walking around all the time sending out ideas, looking for people who can meet us halfway, who can help us, who can assist us, who can provide the pink buckets that we're looking for in some manner. Mike Nesmith called his memoir Infinite Tuesday because he felt that time couldn't be explained or understood. We refer to a day of the week as Tuesday, but what's really happening may be this kind of spherical, multi-dimension ball of events where things are interconnected in ways that we are unable to see, in ways that escape our normal sensory awareness, which is why focusing our thoughts may put us into relation to events and to people that go beyond and go outside our linear perception. That's my contention to you as charter members of the Miracle Club. And what I want to do right now is I want to spend our remaining time together giving you 4 very concrete exercises. And then I'm going to open it to question and answer. I'm going to take one momentary pause and I'll be right back because I want to quiet some noise that's in the background. Guys, you have to close this. I'm back. Did everyone enjoy their intermission? Good, I did. I need to quiet some noise that's in the background. So now, I want to go into 4 methods that you can use to try to experiment with some of this material that I've been describing. I've described to you what I call a miracle. I have described to you the historical basis of this term, the Miracle Club, which I invite you into. I have provided 3 examples, among many others, of why I've come to the contention at this point in life that our thoughts do possess some kind of causative property. They're not the exclusive thing we live under. We live under many laws and forces, But I do believe that the agency of mind is one, and it goes beyond the cognitive or motor functions that we've come to associate with our minds. There's a non-physical capacity to mind. I present this to you not as a doctrine, but as a tantalizing source of experimentation, as a deepened and tantalizing question. And I want you to find this question enjoyable. I want you to find this question something that you experiment with as a way of moving in the direction of your own deepest aspirations. I want there to be a payoff in your experimentation. And I want you to form your own sense of testimony along the lines of some of the things I've just been describing as to the results. So let me give you 4 very concrete ideas that you can work with. These 4 ideas came to me recently because I received an email from somebody who explained to me that she had left her corporate job about 10 years ago. She may even be among our audience tonight. She left her corporate job about 10 years ago, and her wish was to make her way as an entrepreneur. And what she had found after 10 years of trying was that at the end of each month, she was able to meet her bills. She was able to make ends meet, but not much more than that, not much more than that. And she was disappointed. And she said she didn't understand why she seemed to be banging up against these limits, because she believed in the kind of material that we are talking about. She always tried to maintain a hopeful, forward-looking, informed, progressive attitude about the circumstances that she was encountering. And it's not that she was facing a crisis. She was able to make ends meet. But when she left her corporate job 10 years ago, her wish was to become a really successful entrepreneur. It wasn't just about making ends meet, but it was about thriving in some way. And she felt like something had gone awry, something wasn't working. And she wanted to know, what did I think she should do in facing this disappointment? And I thought about what she asked. And when people bring these questions to me, I'm a co-seeker. I mean, I'm there in the mosh pit with you. I don't view myself as some sort of a mind guru or something like that. I'm a student. I'm a seeker, as you are. And I thought to myself, what could I bring to this woman that I'd be willing to bring into my own life? And as I began to formulate a response to her that I hoped would be productive and useful, it struck me that the things that I would recommend to somebody facing disappointment are really good, serviceable methods for anybody under any circumstances who want to experiment with the powers of their mind. So this is what I brought back to my correspondent. I brought her 4 ideas, 4 very actionable ideas, and I want to bring them to you. The first of the 4 is, it's vitally, vitally important to have a definite chief aim. I mean, to have a really passionately felt concrete aim. For my friend in New England, he needed to get out of financial trouble. He didn't know what railway he would use. He didn't know how he would get from point A to point B. He didn't have a clear conception of it, but he knew that that was deeply, deeply important. Your aim may change over the course of time, but where you are in the here and now, you need a definite, absolute, passionately felt, passionately held to aim. An aim that you feel with precisely an obsessive quality. Nowadays, we think of the word obsession as something negative. We think of an obsession as a symptom of a problem, as something that needs to be diagnosed, prescribed, and cured. But I say to you, an obsession can be a very positive thing. If you were to look into the lives of people you admire, I mean, people you really regard as heroes, as forces that you want to emulate, you'll almost always find, that their lives can be defined by some sort of an obsessional interest that they held and they stood for, live or die. And for Helen Keller, for example, she wanted to demonstrate that a severely disabled person did not have to have a grossly limited and prescribed life. For Gandhi, he wanted to bring independence to the nation of India. For Steve Jobs, he wanted to revolutionize handheld digital technologies. For Nelson Mandela, he wanted to bring democracy to South Africa. Whoever you look at, an artist, soldier, statesman, an unknown person, chances are, if you look upon somebody as a hero whose example you wish to emulate, you will almost always find one single core obsessional drive and interest in that person's life. You don't care, and I don't care, whether Nelson Mandela was interested in opera. He may have been, but his life was dedicated to bringing justice and freedom, not to humanity, although he clearly wanted that, but to his nation of South Africa. It was a focused, definite, clear aim. It doesn't matter what your aim is. It only matters that it is exquisitely your own. It should be something you feel intimately. You don't have to share it with other people. In some cases, it's better not to share it with other people, because sometimes other people who may be nursing regrets that they might not even know exist over their own failure to pursue their deepest aspirations will immediately run down yours. Your own friends will do that to you. Your own relatives sitting around the Thanksgiving table will do that to you, and you've probably already experienced it. Now, your aim needs to be passionate. It needs to be obsessive. I don't view obsessive as a bad word. And it needs to be actionable. For an aim to be a real aim, you have to be able to take practical steps in the direction of your aim, however small, however small. But for an aim to be real and not just to be a fantasy or a daydream or some kind of unicorn, you have to be able to take some concrete, actionable steps in its direction. Now, my definite chief aim is to chronicle metaphysical experience. I came to realize that maybe about 15 years ago, and it ignited everything for me. Another time, another place, I'll explain to you and go through the circumstances of how I came to realize that. But I had stopped writing. I was a journalist when I was in college. I was a journalist for a short time after I graduated, but it was an unsatisfying career to me. And I had some friends who were involved in publishing at the time, including my friend Ray Parrish, who may actually be on this webinar right now. And I was inspired to sort of try that as a career, and I did. And it was good to me in a lot of ways. It was good to me in a lot of ways. But it wasn't writing, and it wasn't really ultimately what I wanted to do. And I had made a kind of uncomfortable, sort of cold peace with the fact that I had left writing behind. And I wasn't even sure what I wanted to write about. I knew I didn't want to be one of these guys bopping around New York City writing book reviews for the Village Voice or what have you. I didn't want to be writing about politics because I felt, even though I had political interests, there was enough people already doing that. I didn't feel like I had anything particularly new to bring to the table, and I didn't know what I wanted to write about. But through a series of really fortuitous circumstances, which I'll save for another time, I came to realize that I wanted to write about metaphysical experience in history and practice. And it ignited everything for me. And it was and remains an obsession. It's what brings me here, talking to you. I've stayed up all night working on passages from books. I said to a friend of mine, there are two kinds of writers: those who sleep at night and those who write good books. You have to want to write more than you want to sleep. You have to want to write more than you want to eat, more than you want to drink. It's so important. You'll encounter friction. You'll encounter difficulties. You'll encounter serious bumps, which is why being passionate about your aim is so important. And people immediately want to argue with this and want to say, well, gee, life is complicated. I have lots of things I want to accomplish. And sure, I have lots of things I want to accomplish as well. I'm a parent. I'm involved with all kinds of different things in life. But I think life strikes a tough bargain with us. And that tough bargain is that you get to channel your energies and your resources in the direction of one core aspiration. And that core aspiration can facilitate lots of other things, including, frankly, making you happy. Something that's unrealized can almost feel like a constant source of friction and discomfort in your life. There's this expression, no one goes to their deathbed wishing they had spent more time at the office. I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure that expression is true at all. It doesn't have to be the office. Maybe it's the studio. Maybe it's the business that you're trying to start. Founding a business is a tremendous act of self-realization. I think a lot of people don't appreciate that. There's a tremendous and wonderful act of self-realization in successfully launching some sort of resource-bearing, money-making operation. Or you might want to be a student or a soldier or an activist or a parent as some sort of driving, all-consuming force in your life. Yes, we all wear many hats, but one finely felt ethical aspiration can satisfy a lot of different needs. And that is my challenge to you. And don't be too quick about it. Don't be too quick about it. What is your definite chief aim in life? Do you have one? I bet you do. But sometimes we hide from these aims because maybe we think they're unappealing. We're told, spiritual people are not supposed to be interested in money. Says who? Says who? Maybe money is very important to you. I don't think you have to justify the ethics of what you want to anybody else. Besides, money accomplishes all kinds of good things. It puts kids through school. It allows you to travel. Maybe it will allow you to take care of some very important health-related costs. Maybe it'll allow you to help somebody else. Maybe you simply want beautiful things. You don't have to apologize to anybody for that. You don't have to make excuses to anybody. You don't even have to tell them. There's said to be some sort of an occult power in silence. I believe that's true. I believe that's true. Because, again, when you tell people of your aspirations too casually, you almost open yourself up to criticism because they'll project onto you whatever their own disappointments are and say, that's unrealistic. You're never going to raise horses. You're never going to do this. You're never going to do that, because they're projecting their own disappointments onto you. We all can recognize, the only things we're capable of recognizing within other people are things that we feel within ourselves. So somebody who's suffered a disappointment will recognize or project disappointment onto another person, even if it's not there, which is among the reasons. May not be the only reason, but it's among the reasons why practicing discretion is very important. So my challenge to you is take this exercise that sounds so simple, but when you apply it, it's not so simple. It's very, very intimate, and it's exquisitely private and exquisitely yours. Ask yourself in a mature, sustained way, what is your definite chief aim in life? What are you most passionate about? Because the only way that your energies can be harnessed and directed are through focus, real exquisite focus. And you will find abilities, intellectual and physical, within yourself that you never knew you possessed. And I can tell you that from personal experience. I can tell you that from personal experience. You have a view into my life tonight. You've seen my two kids walking around. My wife is a journalist. She's on deadline right now. We don't have a life that's free from worldly domestic responsibilities. And yet the thing that allows me to be here with you and to get a great deal done is that I'm able to focus my energies very, very deeply onto this aspiration of chronicling metaphysical experience. And it will bring out your definite aim. Your arrival at a passionate, definite aim will bring out capacities in you that you never knew existed. But to find that aim, you have to be sustained, you have to be mature, you have to be unembarrassed. You have no excuses to make to anybody about what you want. Your desires are sacred, they're beautiful, they're creative, whatever they are, whatever they are. I don't want to hear anybody picking on the movie The Secret and saying, oh, should the end of all spiritual aspiration be the manifestation of a Mercedes-Benz? That's not in The Secret, but if you wanted a Mercedes-Benz or whatever, I would defend that choice, because that might mean something very, very deep to you that another person can't understand. And they don't have to understand it. It's yours. You might want to be an artist. You might want to start a business. You might want to be a professional. You might want to get a certain degree. You might want to recover from an illness. These things are all circumstantial and they're all deeply individual. So, number one challenge, find a definite chief aim. I have a book called The Miracle of a Definite Chief Aim. You can check it out if you feel like it. But the point is, just start. Just start. It's your exquisite inner journey. And I want you to enjoy it. And I want you to be private about it. If you have a trusted mate or colleague, sure, you could share something, but be discreet. Be discreet, because there is an occult power in silence. Number two, ethics. I think it's very important to make sure that your aim squares with your ethics. It's important to feel good about what you're doing. I think any aim is valid as long as it's nonviolent. And by nonviolent, I mean simply this. I'm not talking about pacifism. By nonviolent, I mean not doing anything that would knowingly or overtly disrupt another person's pursuit of his or her own highest potential. That's all. I think you should be transparent. I think you should be honest. I think you should deliver to people exactly what you say you're delivering. The Gospels say, let thine eye be single, let thine eye be single. You should try as best as possible to reflect on the outside who you are within. Be a plain dealer. Just make sure that there's not some friction between your most deeply held ethics and what you're pursuing. I've had to wrestle with that myself. As I've said, my chief aim is to be a chronicler of metaphysical experience. I have a great interest in television. And at various times, I'm pursuing different television treatments, or I might have shows that are in varying degrees of development. A few years ago, I was in a whole deal with ABC to co-host a daily New Age-oriented talk show. It didn't ultimately get off the ground. I've had a lot of things like that, and everybody who's involved in television has stories like that where, there's a lot of almosts. And I've had to ask myself quite recently, are my interests in television in harmony with my own ethics? Because there's a lot of fakery that goes on television too. A lot of the so-called reality shows are just really fake and artificial, and they're really designed to embarrass certain people or humiliate certain people for the entertainment of the audience, which I find just disgusting, frankly. Some of the so-called history shows that you'll see on various cable networks they're doctored up. They don't have good standards and ethics. They don't really have solid journalistic or historical practice at their backs. They chafe with the principles that I try to live by. So I've wondered, is there some fissure between my own interest in television and some of the media that I pursue my activities within? And that's an active, live question for me. That is an active, live question for me. I want you to ask yourself those kinds of questions. Make sure that there's a comportment between your ethics and your pursuits. But that's not to presuppose that there is. That is not to presuppose that there is. I don't want ethical questions to put some sort of a limitation or a barrier in front of what you want to achieve. I don't believe in being Pollyanna-ish about material wishes, for example. We are here in this physical realm for a fixed period of time. I assume there is some sort of a continuance of life beyond the physical, but I do not know that. I do not know that. I do know that we are here, and I do believe that aspiration is sacred, and I do believe that the human personality is sacred. And I want you to pursue what feels right to you. Don't let someone take that from you. There are certain sensitive moments where we all have finer periods of perspective, where we all know just what we want. Not always. Sometimes we get led astray. Sometimes we get distracted. But at our highest and finest moments, we know precisely what we want. Follow that and honor that. You have to be sure, as I was saying to my friend who corresponded with me, that there is not a rupture between your ethical ideas and what you're pursuing. That's a serious question and that's a mature question, but that question should not presuppose that there is, and it's not there to limit you. It's just there to serve as a kind of a guardrail for you. Number 3, I believe in the power of prayer. If there's something that you want passionately, and if you feel that you are butting your head up against some sort of limits, if it feels like that you're hitting some sort of invisible ceiling and you don't know why, I think you should resort to prayer. I think that we as individuals relate to some form of intelligence that goes beyond our flesh and blood, cognitive and motor functions. It may be called by different names: God, a higher power, universal intellect, nous, a Greek word for a kind of overmind that exists. There's all kinds of names and personifications and framings of the idea of deity. But I do believe that we are not left entirely to our own devices. And I think prayer is an important agency that's given to us for the following reason. There are, in fact, times in life where we just feel emotionally crushed. There are times in life where we are deeply anxious, where we are depressed, where we are not able to use our minds in constructive ways. These things can occur fairly regularly. There are times where we feel a profound sense of sorrow. There are times where we are just overcome by fears, anxiety, and emotions, and we're unable to sit down and direct our minds with affirmations and visualizations and meditations and sort of fix ourselves constructively on some wished for ideal. At such moments, I believe we are given the agency of prayer as a way of reconnecting ourselves to our highest ideals. And I do not believe, as some people within the alternative spiritual culture, which I love and of which I'm a part, or as some people within the New Thought culture teach, that you need to pray from this perspective of calm repose, as if you've already received that which you wish for. I don't believe that you need to, or frankly can be expected to, pray in a manner of confident restfulness that you've already received the thing that you want. I say this because very often in books of popular metaphysics, especially the kind of mind power metaphysics that I'm speaking with you about right now, metaphysics that come from within the New Thought world, of which I'm a part and which I love, and which is a community that sustains me, there is sometimes a certain habitualness or even an orthodoxy about prayer that holds that prayer has to be conducted in this spirit of calm composure, feeling confidently that you've already received what you desire, and that quiet, calm repose will itself serve as an attracting force. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that may be one option among several that is valid, but I don't hold to the belief that you have to pray in only one way, or you have to affirm in only one way, or that you have to conduct prayer only when you're in a state of calm confidence. Because I think actually prayer is there for us when we're in a space of crisis, when we're unable to use our minds in ways that are constructive and visualizing and affirming. If you want to drop to your knees during prayer, if you want to beg, you should do so. You should do so. You should follow what your heart desires and what your heart needs. You know, scripture is filled with instances of the patriarchs and the matriarchs arguing with God, so to speak, answering back God. Adam does this. Jonah does this. Devorah does this. Cain does this. Cain, after committing this act of fratricide against his brother Abel, in agony says to God, the punishment that you've given me is too great. I'll be wandering around the earth. I'll be vulnerable to anybody who wants to kill me. So God responds to Cain, actually responds to Cain, and says, all right, I'm going to place a mark on you, what we call the mark of Cain, so that it'll be clear that anybody who commits an act of violence against you will be punished a multitude of times over. So you'll be protected. You won't just be this nomad who's physically vulnerable to anybody that you come across. Cain argues with God from a place of agony. God responds to him and reduces his sentence. You should be able to engage in prayer any way you want. If you want to fall to your knees and beg and cry and pound the floor, do so. Do so. Do so. There is no wrong way to appeal to the higher. Prayer, if it's anything at all, is a way out of a box that our psyche locks us into sometimes. And I think you should avail yourself of it with complete abandon and freedom. So, what I've said so far is, number one, having a definite chief aim, one that you feel passionately and with absolute obsessional drive. It channels your energies. Two, making sure that your ethics comport with your aim. And three, most recently, praying any way you want. Fourth and finally, is when you find yourself in an interim period, and there's an interval, there's a period of gestation that goes on between what you desire and what events unfold. When you find yourself in this intermediary period, train. Constantly do everything to make yourself better. Imagine that you're a martial artist who's constantly training for that day when his or her abilities may be called upon, or you're a master musician who's constantly waiting for that time, that place, that moment when you'll be called to the stage and that audience is just waiting for you. Pursue excellence. Pursue your highest abilities. Focus your energies, hone your energies, hone your abilities constantly. Because the moment may come very unexpectedly when the thing that you're seeking meets you right on the path. And when that moment comes, you want to be able to meet it with pitch perfect ability and capacity. Someone I worked with many, many years ago wrote a book about so-called Green Berets, the special forces in the Army. And one of the things that she pointed out is that the special forces, the members of the special forces, they spend the vast majority of their time not on missions, but training, constantly training, so that when a mission comes, and it could come very unexpectedly, their martial abilities are honed to a razor's edge. Think of yourself in that way. Whatever walk of life you're in, whatever you pursue, whatever your interests are, think of yourself that way. There's going to be an interim period. There's going to be a period of gestation between what you want and the events themselves that marry to your desires. Fill that interim period, not with anxiousness, not with uncomfortable expectancy, like you're waiting outside a delivery room, but fill it with training. People talk about faith sometimes. I've never really had a grasp on the concept of faith, quite frankly. I do know that there was a very, very famous minister who died several years ago. And I was told by somebody who was outside of his room that the minister's daughter emerged and said, "Daddy, Daddy's on his deathbed and he has no faith. Daddy has no faith. And I felt great empathy with that figure at that moment, because I'm not sure I've ever understood quite what faith is. But I do understand what persistence is. And I think faith and persistence are probably joined in some way. So don't worry about having faith. Don't worry about being an optimist. I'm not an optimist. I got into all this precisely because I'm not a natural optimist. I needed something extra to help me through life. That's what brought me to mind metaphysics when I was a kid. I'm not a naturally rosy person, but it seems to me that you don't have to fill up your interim periods and your empty periods with some vain attempt at what we call faith or optimism. You need to fill them up with perseverance. And perseverance is expressed in the form of training. Constantly train yourself. Again, think of yourself as a martial artist or a master musician or a special forces soldier who's constantly training for that eventuality that at an unexpected time and moment, and it very often is unexpected, you will be there able to meet the opportunity or the necessity that presents itself to you. So don't think of faith and don't think of optimism, which I think could be very limiting concepts that almost make you feel like you have to try to twist your mood in certain ways, which we really can't do. The mood and intellect are two different things. But you can persist and you can train and fill your interim hours, and there will be interim hours, with training, training, training. So I leave you with those 4 exercises, and I want you to start working on them tonight. Finding a definite chief aim using whatever internal methods are available to you. And there are many, but getting out the old list of paper and pencil is probably the most hallowed and the most widely practiced. Use it. Be private, be unembarrassed, making sure that your ethics square with your wishes. Engaging in prayer, unembarrassed. Now, if prayer doesn't come naturally to you, then see it as framing a request, a question. Ask for what you want. You don't know. I don't know what non-physical agencies are out there. I feel certain that our lives are not just flesh and bone. Ask for what you want. And finally, fill the intimate hours with training and persistence. And I believe that if you practice all these things with deep passion, and I think in a mood of jubilance, if I can put it that way, you should be thrilled with the prospect of moving toward something that you want. With deep obsessional commitment and a kind of jubilance, I think you will find that these activities will bring you to a place where you encounter circumstance on the road of life and you are ready for it. So, my friends, those are 4 ideals that I leave you with as charter members of the Miracle Club. Welcome. You are members. We're all experimenters. And we're going to form a record and a testimony together. Now, we have about 10, 15 minutes left tonight. So I want to open the floor to questions, exchanges, any ideas that anybody has. Fire away. Jeremy Johnson is at the controls. There's Jeremy.
Hey, Mitch, that was amazing. Thank you. I took a lot of notes, and I'm definitely going to be working on my definite chief aim tonight.
Cool.
Cool. So, yeah, so cool. And I really related to you, too, because I used to practice martial arts a lot, and recently I've been getting back into it. So it's just kind of like, oh, you're kind of speaking to me here. So,
excellent. And if you get hurt, we have a cast for you.
Got a pink
one.
one.
Life is better now, but you can have the pink cast. So I hope you don't get hurt. But,
Thank you, but that would be okay too.
I'm sure you
So we had a question from Lisa. Lisa's asking, please speak about intuition.
Wonderful, wonderful question. Intuition is something we hear a lot about, and I do think intuition is a very real thing. What it is, we're not so sure. I think that intuition probably plays into this idea that I was talking about earlier when I was referencing the story about the monkeys. Why did I get so interested in the monkeys, of all things, just before being asked to write a review of Mike Nesmith's memoirs. Now, I refer to this as a time collapse, where time no longer seems to travel a linear path, but we discover that in a certain sense, everything seems to be happening at once. Everything seems to be like this three-dimensional or multi-dimensional spoked wheel where all kinds of influences are interplaying at once. And I think that there are probably certain moments of keener perspective that we call intuition. And it's real, and we are gleaning something. We are gleaning something. I think a way to tap intuition, and this is another thing that we can all try together tonight, in the moments before you go to sleep at night, you're in a very exquisitely relaxed state, and your mind is very supple and suggestible. Just in those moments before you go to sleep, formulate something that you're looking for an answer to. It may not come right away, and it may not come for days, it may not come for weeks, but use that very relaxed, exquisite time when you're not distracted, when you're physically at ease, when you're just about to go into a very deep state of sleep, but where the mind is still active and you can still direct your attention and awareness. Just carry a suggestion into that sleep state. I think that's one way to experiment with intuition. But I do think it's very real, and I do think it can arrive at very sudden moments, because our lives are composed of all these wildly crisscrossing influences that we think are linear, but that are all kind of mashed up together in this kind of soup. And we get keener glimpses sometimes of what's really going on, which we describe as intuition. I think it's a very real thing.
Okay, so let's see if we got any. Joseph has an interesting question, but maybe we can get to that later at the end. It's kind of like it's not related exactly, I think, okay. Joseph. It's an occult question.
Oh, cool. Oh, I definitely want to hear it.
Yeah. Maybe we'll get that at the end. But sure. If anybody has any questions directly about the class, and specifically about these techniques, these exercises, that would be great. And Lisa says thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm glad you made it. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you think there's any difference, while we're waiting for a question, between what your friend did, the example you had about your friend listening to the audiobook, reading, like, immersing yourself in the sound of the voice of like, okay, here's this worldview, really adopt this, and listening to it constantly versus reading it?
Oh, that's an interesting question. What turned me on about what my friend did, I mean, I think any medium can work. The audible medium of a book, the printed medium of a screen or a page. I think any medium could work. But what turned me on about what my friend did, and what I thought made it practical and workable, was that it was very nonconformist. He came to the decision that he wanted to take in this message, and he chose to take it in a way that just spoke to him. And of course, people around my friend, people around me, people around you could say like, oh boy, Mitch is getting really weird, or Jeremy is getting really weird. I mean, he's sitting in his room listening to this thing over and over. Has he cracked up? Let them ask, have you cracked up? I mean, why should you or I or anybody here with us tonight be conformist about how we take in a message, or limit ourselves in terms of where that message might come from? A friend of mine, Michael Muhammad Knight, began his conversion to Islam after he saw the movie Malcolm X by Spike Lee. And he wondered, can a movie be sacred scripture? Can a movie be a sacred experience? And my answer is, of course, yes. Maybe there's a certain movie that an individual might want to watch over and over because it has a message that speaks to them very deeply. And it might really surprise people what that message is. A movie that I've watched over and over and that I treasure is a movie starring the wonderful actor Oscar Isaacs called A Most Violent Year. A Most Violent Year. It might sound like a strange movie to derive an inspirational message from, but Isaacs plays this immigrant, very driven businessman in New York City in the 1970s. And he's actually a very principled, decent guy who is swimming in a pool of sharks. He works in the home heating oil industry. And it's filled with all these mobsters and gangsters and sort of sleazy characters. And he's actually an honorable guy, and he's trying to make a go of it. And he's a very tough guy, and he's a very driven guy, and a very determined guy. And a friend of his at some point in the movie says to him, "Why do you pursue success so single-mindedly? Why do you want it? Why do you want it so much?" And he turns to his friend, and with complete earnestness, he says, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't even know what you're asking me. It's like life itself for him is driven towards succeeding. And the movie presents a very sympathetic portrait of this man at the end. He's not an ugly or grotesque figure. He's a very capable and admirable figure who ultimately does find his way ethically in a very, very difficult world. But what was so extraordinary to me about this movie was how driven in a positive way, in my view, this character was. I've probably watched that movie 5 times. So I guess what I'm trying to get across to you is that marrying emotion to intellect is very powerful whenever it occurs and however it occurs. For me, it was through multiple viewings of that movie. From my friend, it was listening to, my audio recording of The Magic of Believing over and over. His family or friends of his might have thought, he's nuts, he's obsessively listening to this. So what? Let him think that. It was the very nonconformity of it that I thought was so beautiful.
So this one's from Joseph as well. And Joseph's asking, what is your favorite method of prayer?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. What is my favorite method of prayer? I suppose my favorite method of prayer is visualizing something that I'm very, very deeply desirous of, as I was alluding earlier, just in those few moments before I go to sleep at night. I write a lot about that. I write about that in the Miracle Club. I write about that in my book, One Simple Idea. I don't have time to fully unpack it right now, but sleep researchers call that the hypnagogic state. And it's a state that's also been experimented with by people who are involved in psychical research or ESP research. And they find that it is a heightened time of ESP, or the anomalous transfer of information in a lab setting. And these experiments, which are called the Ganzfeld experiments — Ganzfeld is German for open field or whole field — they've been very fruitful, they're very powerful, they're very serious. This is really deeply rigorous and serious clinical ESP research, and they found that those moments just before you go to sleep at night are sort of prime time, so to speak, for either extrasensory episodes or for affirmations or meditations. I always use that time, and I invite everybody listening to use that time to visualize a desired outcome. It's very simple. Visualize a desired outcome in those precious few moments just before nodding off to sleep at night. Is that a form of prayer? It is a form of trying to commune with some sort of non-physical agency. So I'm speaking, I guess, very broadly of prayer in that sense, but that's my chief practice today in that area, and that's what I recommend.
Sort of a bonus suggestion then, number 5, yeah, right?
Yeah. Number 5, extra credit in the Miracle Club. Yes.
Excellent. So this one, we got another great question from Nick, and Nick is my good buddy, actually, so I know what he's talking about here. As a writer, in the middle of his first real rough draft, 60K words in, is there anything specific/special about your thoughts and thinking based on your individual drive, like a painter versus a writer versus a performer?
Well, I know that when I was working on my first book, Cult America, which is a history book, and it's filled with names and dates and episodes, I was very ignited by the drive not to make any mistakes. I wanted my historicism to be accurate, to be professional, to stand up to scrutiny, and to also be transparent. I wanted to be very clear about my sources, because occult history is such a mess, and it's very difficult to determine what sources to trust. And so I was very driven at the time by really wanting to clarify thorny and complex topics. There are people in occult history like Jung or Madame Blavatsky who are sometimes accused in a very simplistic way of having these dark associations That's all very inadequate and insufficient. And I was very determined to unpack these figures in a serious, mature way, to be transparent about my sources, not to make mistakes. And that that was a very driving factor to me. I hope I'm getting close to your friend's question. You know, I mean, that was a different set of circumstances than a painter or an opera singer or another kind of artist might feel. But as a writer, as a historical writer, those things really drove me. They really drove me. And I would fall asleep at night, you know, on the sofa with like papers all over me. And my wife always knows when I'm working on a new book because I fall asleep and I've got like, you know, source material all over me. Like, you know, a complete disaster. But it has a wonderful payoff, which is that you know, you're putting tremendous sweat equity into clarity, into historical integrity, into transparency of reportage. So speaking personally for me, those factors really drove me very hard when I was working on my first book, and continue to.
Thank you. And yeah, we're getting some comments here. Just love the seminar. Please do more. And
Happy
just
to. Thank you.
seconding that. So this one's from Kelly. This is a good one. Curious what your thoughts are and the difference with mentally focusing on what you want to say versus sigil magic, where you ultimately detach mentally from the thing you want once you put it out there.
That's a wonderful, wonderful question. I've just begun experimenting myself with sigil magic, as a matter of fact, and I have tremendous respect for it. I have personally found at this point in my path, and you know, I may revisit this in 6 months, I've personally found that sigils and images are useful to me insofar as they signify the thing that I'm after. I do value and I do honor the idea of creating a sigil, or for that matter, burning a devotional candle or saying a prayer, or you know, engaging in some kind of ritual and then forgetting about it. You know, I think that there is power in that. And I also think, and this is something that was pointed out by Anton LaVey, who's a brilliant writer and artist, and Anton was the founder of the Church of Satan. He died in 1997, but Anton was asked at one point, why do my rituals not seem to work? Why do my rituals seem to come up dry? And he said, you care too much about it. What you have to do is do your ritual and do it powerfully. You know, really burn this thing out of you, whatever it is that your ritual is, whether you're going through ceremonial magic or making a sigil or burning a candle or whatever it is. Do your ritual, feel it deeply, feel it passionately, burn it out of you, and then let it go, let it go, let it go. And as a friend of mine put it on social media, it's almost like the moment you light the cigarette, that's when the bus arrives. You know, if you're waiting for the bus and you're like, where's the bus? Light a cigarette and the bus will arrive. And I have sometimes found that to be true. So I know that there's power in sigil magic. I know that there's power in channeling your desires symbolically into something and then letting it go. You know, go off, have a drink, watch a movie, you know, go bowling, whatever it is. There's power in that. I'm experimenting with that. You know, personally, the way that I've used symbols have usually been to arouse or re-arouse my association with things. I think that's one of the reasons why people like vision boards, and people will experiment with different permutations of vision boards. They'll use images in all kinds of different ways. I think those things can be powerful points of arousal, igniters. But I also think, and there may be a paradox here, and being on the occult path means living with paradox. It's very important not to turn paradox into this thing that twists you up in knots, but to live with paradox. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's arousing and igniting, you know, the original passion in yourself, and also just forgetting it. You know, do your ritual, do your sigil, and let it go. So I'm experimenting with that right now, and I think there's great power on both sides of that equation. I hope that's helpful.
Great. Yeah, I've heard sigil magic described in a similar way as semi-autonomous intention thought forms, right? So you're almost like building these little micro tulpas that are going to do that exercise of creative imagination and will for you, just to kind of amplify your signal, right?
Beautifully put. Micro tulpa. That is a beautiful phrase.
Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of.
I love it.
So I think that's it for our questions right now. And we're a little over time anyway.
That,
Oh, yeah. So
Joseph,
the occult question, it's just an occult rumor. Joseph was asking if you know anything about Crowley and Barbara Bush. Do you know that rumor going on right now that Barbara Bush is the secret daughter of Aleister Crowley? This is going all over the internet.
I wish.
All over Facebook.
That's my response. I wish. You know, it would be a better world from my perspective. Now that you mention it, I have heard that. I heard that a few years ago. Thank you, because I hadn't thought of that in a long, long time. I wish. You know, I think I have to conscript that to, like, you know, Jay-Z being a member of the Illuminati. Like, if only, you know, if only.
Yeah.
I thank him for reminding me of it, because I had heard that years ago. If he has a link or something that seems worthwhile, please send it to me. I'm super easy to find. In fact, for anybody who's on this webcast tonight, you're all members of the Miracle Club, so you're very welcome to contact me. Throw my name into Google. I'm very easy to find. Send me a link if you have something that you think is worth looking at. Thank you for reminding me of that, because I did hear that a few years ago, and let me tell you, it completely slipped my memory. But I guess this is the season for reflecting on that again.
Well, Mitch, this has been a pleasure. It's been very inspiring.
Likewise.
And I'm sure we all feel that way. And I hope that we can have another Miracle Club session sometime in the near future.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it. I'd be delighted to do it again anytime, for sure.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mitch. And thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight. We'll see you again soon. We'll be in touch. And the recording will be available tomorrow evening. So
beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, yes. And welcome to the Miracle Club.
Yes. Welcome to the Miracle Club. Good night.
Take care. Good night.